Well, good morning, everyone, and it's a happy new year to all of you who are listening to this little study. So appreciate that this can be, I pray, a blessing into your life, and that you can see just the richness of God's Word, and that through this all, you truly are just a reinforcement of how much God loves you and cares about you, and that has existed from the time that he has created Adam and Eve, and that he still shows that love and that mercy today. And so we're going to continue. We left chapter 10 of First Samuel last week and picking up in chapter 11. And as we remember, Saul has been chosen to be king by Samuel, as God has called him, and we had the selection occur last week. But it takes a while for things to become gelled together, and so we're going to see that Saul gets his first attempt at being king, and how God uses him. And just what I want to point out is just the mercies of God that comes through in the Hebrew language that is not so clearly seen in the English translation. So as we pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 11, we see that it uses this term that is very much a part of the biblical narrative. It's Vayal, which means it came to pass. Uh, as time went on, it might almost fit into this once upon a time, as we know from many of our children's stories. When you see this, you know something profound is coming, and that there's something that is going to be taught in a way that we need to pay attention. So we see here that it mentions about a group of people called the Ammonites. And remembering from study in Genesis, the Ammonites were always a thorn and a trouble to the children of Israel. But yet, what's interesting is they are related to the children of Israel. Ammon was the son of Lot. If you remember the story of Lot, how he fled the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, his wife turned back, and we know that she was turned into a pillar of salt. But the story went on that Lot's two daughters um, fled with him. And of course, they felt that the whole world was going to be destroyed, and apocalyptic type atmosphere. And of course, they were not grounded in the truth of God's word. Again, there was nothing printed, no churches, no synagogues, no Torah, no Bible. And so, they took things into a very carnal realm, and they caused their father Lot to become drunk. And while he was drunk, they both slept with him, both of the daughters, and he ended up impregnating them, but was not aware of that because he was intoxicated. Well, one of these children was the name of Ammon, and he became the father of the Ammonites. And so it's really interesting how they are relatives, because Lot was Abraham's nephew. So this was like a second or a third cousin of Jacob, uh, um, of Isaac, excuse me, and Jacob being even further removed. But yet they were relatives. But yet you see such a fierce um, uh, persecution of the Israelites by what is a family member. Again, very interesting um, how this takes place, and how the relativity here, the um, nepotism of being a relative, then causes this animosity. Quite interesting. But you'll see the Ammonites have always been a problem. And the leader of the Ammonites, he probably was their king. His name was Nachash. And of course, we know that in the Hebrew, names have meanings. And so what we did was we do a little look here into the word Nachash. And so we click on this and bring up the word Nachash. And it just kind of gives us, oh, that was the name of one of the Ammonites. But there's a little bit more. We have to go deeper to find out some of the root meaning. And we find that there is a root to it, and it doesn't really give it here in the Bible Hub. We have to go a little bit deeper into some of the other um, study guides that we have. And we find that the word Nahash comes from the root word for the word of a snake, of a word of a serpent. And we'll see that that is very fitting of the name of the attitude of this king of Ammonite, that he is very much a Nachash, a serpent, in how cruel he was and how much he uh, what he did to the children of Israel. Again, a very interesting dynamic showing what happens when people go out of the will of God and the lasting effects that go generation to generation and cause the persecution of the Israelites by a relative, by the Ammonites. We see the same thing in the Moabites. They were also related. They were, and the uh, uh, Ebionites, which are relatives of Esau. Again, just very interesting. And even the relatives of Ishmael, if you want to go back that far, and the nations that they represent today in the Arab countries. They're all related. They're all from Abraham, but yet those that were not of the seed of Isaac and of Jacob, instead of joining a league with them, have turned against them and persecute them. And so, very, very interesting family dynamics, if you will. So Nachash of Ammon comes up and encamps against the children of Israel, and it is just one city. It is the people that live in the city of Yabesh. Yaves. There is no J in the Hebrew language, and so anytime you see a J in English, the Hebrew will tell you that it is a Y pronunciation, or a Yud being the Hebrew letter. And so, again, very interesting just to know that there is no J in the Hebrew language. It's would be a Yud or a Yod. And so Yabesh is the men and the women of the city. We assume it was somewhat of a fortified city and that they were encamped in this city, and the Ammonites came around about them and wanted to lay siege to them, wanted to conquer them and take over their city. Now, again, the names mean something, so we're going to click on the word Yabesh and see if there's a meaning that comes out of what this is. Again, it talks about a proper name. We have to go a little bit deeper into the concordance here. It gives us a little bit of a reference word from the root. So we want to click on this word here, Yabesh, and see where it takes us. And so it takes us one letter, one root step deeper, and it talks about that Yabesh means to be dried up, to withered. And certainly you're going to be able to see that attitude kind of playing out as the Ammonites came upon them, that they were fearful. There was something about them that promoted an attitude of weakness, that um, uh, Nakash felt he could come and overtake them. Why did he choose this city? Because it seemed to be weak. It seemed to be something that looked like an easy target, something that they could go back on and have no trouble conquering. And so we're going to go back to the text here, that they encamped around um, these men of Yabesh and said to them, we're going to conquer you. We want you, we're going to just take you over. But the men of Yabesh tried to create peace. They tried to come up with a covenant, which would have been like a peace agreement. They wanted to come up with a way to preserve their lives because they knew this was a death sentence, basically. It doesn't tell us how many Ammonites were there, but we assume it was a very formidable force that came against them, and the men of Yabesh knew that there was just no opportunity for them to survive this, and so they tried to extend a peace offering, saying, what can we do? We don't want to be killed. We don't want our city burned. We don't want to all die. We'll serve you. We'll be your servants. Let's come to some agreement. And here's where you get to see just how cruel and what a serpent, so to speak, this Nachash was. He answered them. He says, "We'll make a covenant with you on this condition, that we may put out the right eyes of all the people." And, it showed that this wasn't just, a neighborly squall. This wasn't just trying to gain position and power. They really had it in for Israel, and they wanted to prove a point with Israel. They felt that the animosity there was so great that they weren't so concerned about just killing these people. They wanted to make it a reproach. They wanted this to just be such a slap in the face. I'm trying to search for the words to take reproach and put it into a depth of meaning of how much they wanted to just dump on Israel and make them to just be so such disdain and such a harsh cruelty they wanted to show upon Israel, that they're doing this cruelty to just take out their right eyes. Now, the right eye is dominant for most people, which means that, this would be so. Even the thought of losing an eye is terrible enough, but to take out your dominant eye, it would throw off your balance. It would throw off your ability to obviously be an archer or be in war in any way, because you would lose that hand-eye coordination of your right eye being dominant. Think of a person who does any archery or any shooting, anywhere where you're sighting, where you're trying to look at something. You use your right eye to sense that alignment, and so this would be very debilitating for these people to have their dominant eyes removed, and even add extra cruelty to what is already a very cruel practice here. And here's where we get to see what happens not only in a physical realm, but also in what I feel is a spiritual realm here, because God was aware of what was going on. He saw the situation occurring, and many times, we are just at a place where we feel that God is afar off and isn't moved by um, our predicament and the situations that we go through, but it's quite contrary, as I hope to show you from the Hebrew text here. And so we see the story play out, that the people of Yabesh were definitely in a tough situation. But here's something very interesting happens in this negotiation. The elders of Yabesh say to Nachash, saying, "Give us 7 days. Give us 7 days here, that we may send messengers to all the territory of Israel and see if there's anyone that can come and help us. And if we can't get anyone to come and help us, then we acquiesce, we agree to your terms, and we'll do what you want." What's interesting here is, why would uh, Nahash agree to this? Obviously, if we read into this, he must have had such a large army, and the people of Yavish were quite small in comparison. And he had, I think, furthermost, it shows such a lack of credibility that he gives to the Israelites, that he's basically saying, "Hey, call call whoever you want, I don't believe you're going to get anybody to help you. I don't believe anybody can be summoned to come against us in such a way that would make any difference whether you summoned all your friends. And in fact, he probably felt that Israel was in such a disarray after seeing some of the Philistine battles, that he felt they couldn't do anything. What's evident here is Nahash obviously had no understanding of the God of Israel, had no understanding that God was had his favor upon Israel. He obviously didn't know that Saul had been chosen king. None of this has resonated or was reported through the land. And so he felt this was pretty easy pickings. And, you know, there's some things here that just don't make a lot of sense as to you know, again, I think there is a spiritual undertow here. I think God was working in the background. We see in many places in the scriptures that God allowed the Israelites to seek revenge upon the Ammonites and the Moabites. And in fact, in many places that he wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth because of how cruel they were in times past to Israel, and how God decides to execute judgment against the Ammonites. And I believe this is happening here, that he put this into the heart of Nachash to behave in such a way and to allow Israel to respond in such a way, and is setting this up again, that even though the men of Yabesh can't see it, we're going to see that the rest of the Israelites maybe couldn't see it. I believe that there is the hand of God working through this situation to show that he loves Israel and to protect them and provide um, uh, a overcoming victory for them. And so the men of Yabesh send out their messengers, let them escape, and the messengers, obviously, the people of Yabesh knew what had happened with Saul. And it doesn't say that the messengers went through all the other 11, 10 tribes. Tribe of Levi would be excluded, of course, so there'd be only 10 tribes that really would be able to come to their aid. Or I should say the other 11 would come to their aid. And so they send them right to Saul at Gibeah. And so these messengers come, and obviously they're running, they're fearful. This is a life and death situation. And they told the news um, to the people in their hearing. It's kind of an interesting duplicity of words, redundancy of words. And they told them, and they heard them. And this word for hearing, we're just going to take a look at this, because this is not the word Shema, which is what we would expect. And so we click on the number 241, and it takes us to Ozen, which it just says that the words came in their ear. Again, I hate to sound like what's the term, Captain Obvious here, but where do you hear? So again, this is very strange how they use the word debar for being told. These were the word debar. There's two words in Hebrew, as I've mentioned in lessons before, for for speaking. One is amar, which are just everyday words, which are common vocabulary, not a lot of weight to them. Then there are the words davar, which are words from the heart. And so we see here, looking at the word, we see the word davar, daleth, bait, and resh. And so this tells us that these are words from the heart. Also, down below, you'll look at the form of usage of the word here, the type, part of speech, and this is a verb, and it is in the PL form. The PL form is a very intensified, active form of the word, which means it's in we would say it's in the present tense. In Hebrew, there are no tenses, there are no past tense, there are no future tense. There is just a completed and an incompleted. And so what they call that is perfect and imperfect. So that helps a lot when we um, see in the scriptures, sometimes the words will say, "Be perfect as I am perfect." God will use that in reference to his people. To the Hebrew mind, the word perfect doesn't mean what it means to us. It means either complete or incomplete. Again, their vernacular, their sense of understanding was very different to us. The future was not a place that they ever really delved into. Everything was in the here and now. So, in their mindset, things were either completed or they were not yet completed. And so that translates into perfect and imperfect in a verbal sense. And so we see that this word that they're speaking to them is an appeal form, meaning it's very strong, very intensive, and it's imperfect, meaning it's not yet complete. And so they're relaying this in a very heartfelt way, saying that this is going to happen. It's imminent. It hasn't yet occurred. The men haven't been, the story hasn't been fulfilled. The outcome is yet uncertain. It's an imperfect, incompleted way, but yet their heart. They're crying. The intensity behind this is in such a way that it's even, again, I think that plays into why this word be'ezain is there. Be'ezne is there for to hear about their ears, that these words had such impact on their ears that, what do we use the terminology? He made his ears were ringing because someone was talking about them. I think this is playing in here that these words were so harsh that it just they couldn't believe their ears. They couldn't believe they were hearing this. And so when they heard this, they lifted up their voices, and it caused a weeping, just such a um, emotion to let out that this travesty was going to happen, that their brothers and sisters' eyes were going to be removed. It's just, you get all queasy just thinking about it because it's just something we can't hardly relate to. And of course, all of this is happening so fast. And this verse 5 causes the commentators a lot of discussion over where was Saul's and what kind of realm was he in? What was he operating in? Obviously, he wasn't there when they came to the city, but yet the cry went up, and Saul uh, got involved. Here he was in an occupation. He was in the field with his oxen, said he was plowing, and here's this commotion, and obviously wasn't so far away. Uh, but yet, a lot of people, of the commentators, say, well, why wasn't Saul sitting in his palace, waiting for his next order? Again, things were developing. This was the first king. He didn't really know how to set things up. And again, this is where I believe we see God's hand in the background, God moving, bringing about a situation that he can move through Saul. Again, even though this wasn't his perfect plan, it wasn't his perfect plan to have Saul as king, but yet he allowed the people, and again, seen a great mercy of God towards the Israelites, that he doesn't just back off and say, okay, you got a king, let's see what Saul can do. You chose him, and let him deliver the people from Yabesh. Let him deliver them, and I'll just sit back and I'll show you. God doesn't operate in that way. God, in His mercy, is still involved, still um, not allowing His people to suffer the harm that could befall them, and still showing His tender mercies. And so Saul comes into picture. Here's the weeping. They told him what was going on, and the men from Yabesh told him. And this is, again, very, very cool. This is where you see God's hand moving. It said that the Ruach, the Elohim, the Spirit of God came upon him. Again, noticing that the word for God here is Elohim, which is the deliverance, the name for God that's used when there's deliverance, when there's power being implemented, when God is going to stand up in his might. And again, this Spirit of God, we have to realize that in the scriptures, it doesn't denote a separate entity, it doesn't denote a separate person. This is just saying that God's Spirit, because God is Spirit, his Spirit is everywhere, but the concentration or the purpose of his Spirit now is to come upon Saul and to provide deliverance. Again, very much the same way. I don't think it's any coincidence that the Word of God compares the moving of the Spirit or the Spirit itself to wind. And uses, as we have different words in our English language to describe wind. When the wind isn't moving, we say it's calm. When it starts to blow, we say it's a gentle breeze. When it picks up intensity, we can say that it's windy or there's a gale, or a strong wind. Uh, and then we put factors on it where we measure the intensity. If it becomes a tornado or if it becomes a hurricane, all of those, it's still all air. It's still all atmosphere, but it is moving in a definitely a different means and accomplishing something different. And I believe it's proper to apply that thinking when we see the scriptures talk about the Spirit, that it's just a concentrated application of how God is moving at that moment. Um, and so the Spirit of God comes upon Saul, and we can understand that he moves into a different realm than he was just in, that he feels empowered. It says that it aroused his anger. Again, the word anger here is a very interesting word. It's ap, which is really the word for nose. And it's kind of interesting here that it comes from the root word of a camel's nose, that when a camel is in distress, when a camel goes through its different emotions, its nose will flare and it expresses numerous feelings. And so, unfortunately, in our scriptures, every time we see this word apo, um, and it's op is the word, apo puts it in a third person masculine singular form, but the word op means nose, and it's meant to show an emotion. And a camel will show emotion just as a person does over many different things. Many of us, our nostrils will flare, of course, when we feel anger. But a camel will also show emotion when it is asked to do something that it is unable to do. It shows a frustration. Um, and it also shows a passion when a camel is seeking intimacy, when it's in heat, when it's looking for a mate, it's desiring a relationship. It will show this same emotion and its nostrils will flare. And I think it's appropriate for us to look at the context and look at the spiritual realm of this. That many times our translators lost when they would come and talk about the anger of God. Um, all we see many times is that word anger, 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 anger attributed to emotions of God. And what we assign is our Western thought of what we know as being anger. um, it's necessary to go back to a Middle Eastern Hebrew thought of what this word really means, that it is a flaring of the nostrils, and it can show a many different emotions other than what we see as anger. And again, when you look at how the Lord speaks of anger, that we are commanded not to let the sun go down in our anger. We are commanded to be angry, but sin not. So we see what would appear to be a contradiction in the scriptures over how God is able to be angry, but we're not. Uh, with our understanding, I think needs to be um, aligned with the scriptures so that we see that while God doesn't permit anger in us, neither would he allow himself to express those same feelings. So we have to learn what his feelings were. And so we see that I believe here God is showing a great compassion, a great feeling of distress for the people of Yabesh, of what's going to happen, and that is imparted into his people. It's imparted into us. It's imparted into Saul here, as his passion is brought up, that he feels what's going to happen, and he's moved to anger. And so I just wanted to share that, with you about the word anger in the scriptures. Um, does not normally mean what we attribute it to, but I believe that we can see places where the scriptures can give us an enlightenment to show that the majority of the time God is feeling a frustration over something that's happening that is pushing him into a realm that he really doesn't want to be in, and other places where you can tell he's desiring a relationship with us that mankind is thwarting, that mankind is denying him. And so out of that passion for wanting to be with his creation, for his that passion of wanting um, to be in love and share that relationship with his people, God's abilities are stymied, they're thwarted. And so that passion arises within him, displayed and given to us in this word up, for nose, for the flaring of the nostrils, for the showing of this deep passion. And so we're going to stop with that thought today in our study, and pick up on next week as to what happens when Saul is overcome with this passion, and we're going to see that this comes from the heart of God over what's happening. And I just pray that this will maybe change your thoughts a little bit on how you look at God, and how sometimes the scriptures are falsely taken to show God as mean and angry and ready to throw lightning bolts down on you and upon his people and lashing out irrationally. I think once we take this journey through the Hebrew scriptures and look at this word app, and when it comes up often, we're going to get to see a very loving, compassionate God who is forced into situations by our actions that cause him to, yes, be righteous, and yes, to show his judgment, but it's not his desire. It's not his first recourse. It's his last recourse. His first desire is to have an intimate relationship with us and to allow that love and that compassion and that mercy, that it's called racham love. It's a love that a mother has for the child in the womb, when that child hasn't done anything wrong. It hasn't spoken back. It hasn't disobeyed. It's that pure and perfect love that God desires to show for us. So God bless you. I pray that you have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week. And so I pray you're blessed by this study today. All right. God bless you.